Hi everyone, my name is Luisa, and in this presentation I'm talking about ethical issues of using insects in forensic entomology. And it's still quite an understudied subject, and the debate whether insects are sentient or not also is quite difficult. Later on, we will see that some studies have shown that insects have some degree of consciousness, and they do have a nervous systems and a brain much like us. So the contents of this presentation is what is forensic entomology, um, limitations of forensic entomology, invertebrates and pain, um, animal ethics and its theories and the ones that most like to benefit insects. I'm also doing a recommendation for animal welfare standards and guidelines, summary, interest links, and reference. Being entomology the study of insects, forensic entomology is the scientific study of the invasion and successional pattern of arthropods, insects, with their developmental stages of different species found on decomposed cadavers during legal investigation. A main application of forensic entomology is to determine the minimal post-mortem interval by estimating the time of insect colonization. It also can help to detect and recognize wounds, serve as indicators of perimortem and postmortem, and can also demonstrate cases of neglect, such in humans and animals. And most recently, it has helped in many animal cruelty cases. The main insect of the study of entomology is the fly, and most commonly is the blowfly. But we also can see the use of stable flies, flash flies, also the use of beetles, true flies, and beaked flies. So about the killing methods, so those insects, the larvae of those insects, they should be placed in near boiling water, greater than 80 degrees, and beetle larvae and adult insects in extremely cold temperatures, usually around -20. And they should be placed in a solution of 70 to 95% of ethanol alcohol and in collection vials. Sometimes the use of near boiling water is not possible, so they should be killed in ethanol acetate or in other type of killing solutions. Limitations of forensic entomology. So forensic entomology is still not a quite precise field yet, and we can say that for example, time of death needs to be precise, and things such as weather can completely change the data collected. Also, some studies have shown that global warming is changing the animals' characteristics. So they're adapting, and the data that were used in the past may not be useful anymore. Also, forensic entomology relies on insect abundance. So in colder temperatures, there are much less insects to be collected and studied. Also, since it takes time to rear insects, forensic entomology doesn't really present immediate results. Using certain treatments in insects, such as freezing or wrapping, also can affect estimations. Also, forensic entomology doesn't really present great statistical work yet, and chemicals can slow down or accelerate insects' growth, and this also can completely change the data. Invertebrates and pain. As you can see to your right, the number of insects are much greater than any other organism, and a significant amount of literature has been published supporting the view that invertebrates can suffer. And many of invertebrates have shown that have nociception. And nociception is the capacity to detect and respond to noxious or aversive stimuli. You can see those cases in animals such as fruit flies, mollusks, snails, bees, and it seems that that is a necessary condition to experience pain. Neurophysiological indicators also can lead to attribution of experience of pain in invertebrates. It shows that the most basic kind of consciousness is caused by basal ganglia and the midbrain. And it hosts nervous systems in insects. There are many more neurons in humans than insects, but the insects still have it. Other research shows that some cognition capacities have been reported in vertebrates. Some studies show that these include memory and also the capacity to avoid the source of pain. Many studies, once the insect learned that something would cause a negative experience to them, they would learn it, and they would avoid it in the future because they didn't want to feel pain. We can also see the memory features in invertebrates such as bees, cephalops, fruit flies, ants, crustaceans, and etc. Also, some behavior of communication is very complex, and it also indicates some form of consciousness. You can see that, for example, in studies about fruit flies. Even if the attribution of subjective experience is difficult, it seems that it's possible since it's present in vertebrates. So logically would be present in invertebrates as well, even if the degree is lower. Animal and ethics. So here's a well-accepted concept of ethics, but basically is the capacity of having positive and negative subject experience that bring moral consideration. Philosophical thinking on the moral status of animal is diverse, but it could be categorized in three main groups: indirect theories, direct but unequal, and moral equality theories. For the sake of this presentation, focusing in the moral equality theories. So moral equality theories attributes moral status to animals by refuting the supposed moral relevance of the special properties in humans. It also usually extends the concept of rights to animals. So starting with Peter Singer and his equal consideration of interest argument. So this argument would be able to determine the interests of beings that will be affected by our actions, and we should give similar interest to similar way. An example of that would be animals in the slaughterhouse, and we could not rationally justify eating those animals because their concept of suffering is greater than us eating them just for the sake of taste. There's also the animal rights theory, Gary Francione, and usually his arguments focus in three issues: the property status of animals, the difference between animal rights and animal welfare, and the theory of animals' rights based on sentience alone. And is that the one that would mostly benefit insects? So sentience would refer to the capacity to experience episodes of positively or negatively awareness. And examples of positive episodes of awareness are pleasure, contentment, joy, and examples of negatively episodes of awareness are pain, suffering, anxiety, and also depression. So for his argument, just the sentence characters is enough to give animals moral consideration, because they would not need any cognitive characters beyond sentience, and to be members of the moral community, and etc. There is also the virtue ethics theory, and it is a traditional, came from Aristotle. Plato discussed about that as well, and in the Chinese Confucianism. And the main concept of virtue ethics is that of a virtue. Virtue theories believe that good people have moral education and they do right, and they are virtuous because of that. So advocates for that are, for example, Rosalinda Hostholz, and also Knudson, Mott, and Klein and Barrow discuss about the virtue theory. Recommendations for animal welfare standards and guidelines. So currently does not exist any type of standards or guidelines in forensic entomology. And as we saw in previously slides, the scientific data and the ethical theories promote that we should at least consider the possibility that insects have consciousness. And it would also be important to minimize the number of insects collected and killed. In the current standards, the number of insects collected and killed is also not precise. So, and even after they're being used, they could be released in natural environment. The recognition of insects as individuals is also important, because it's an increasing concern about insect populations, because they have been declined, and so we shouldn't assume because they are the larger species that they would not be extincted at some point. Also, educational programs and training is quite important for forensic entomologists, and social awareness, because people needs to have knowledge to understand that there is a possibility that insects are conscious, and that would be enough for treating them at least better. Final considerations. Of course, the fact that we do cause some amount of harm, but it's quite different than intentional harm. So this type of discussion still relies in people's ability to put their egos first, and it's a hard task to ask. And the uncertainty of questions of either insects are sentient or not alone should be enough for moral consideration and how we treat them. Of course, it's difficult to know what any organism experiences, but more studies about invertebrate behavior, capacity to suffer, and ethical implications would certainly benefit the best interest to the animal. A quick summary talked in this presentation today was the implications of the use of insects in forensic entomology, the perspective of scientific data and ethical arguments about insect cognition and sentient and consciousness, and the implementation of standards and guidelines for insect use. Of course, the best interest of the animal would not be used, but if we still do it so, we should have at least moral consideration. So here are some interesting links that I think anyone could benefit from. Please do have a look in the reference. There's a lot of interesting studies. Thank you very much for listening. I really hope that promotes debate about insect consciousness. Take care. Bye.